Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 27. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
My name's Sarah Scott. I'm Professor of Archaeology at the University of Leicester.
Sarah, welcome to the podcast series. What is the object that we're talking about on this particular chapter of the series?
It's actually more than one object. So it's 8 bowls, bronze vessels, and they were found packed inside a 9th vessel, which was some kind of pail or bucket.
So to picture it, this was a bit like Russian dolls then?
Yes, exactly.
Just how big a series of items are we talking about?
I suppose, imagine a fruit bowl, that kind of size. They weren't actually all bowls, so that 4 of them are kind of basins or bowls, and then 3 had handles, or 2 of them still have a handle. There are also vessels with holes punched in, rather like a colander.
So are we talking about purely functional items? Were they decorated? What were they for?
So some of them were plain, but some of them were decorated. So one of the bowls had a crimped rim, so kind of wavy rim. Some of them have been patched and mended, so it's quite clear that they were treasured in antiquity because people had taken care to repair them, and they'd obviously been used for a long time.
These things, I believe, were found, and quite a long time ago in its own right, as a process of discovery.
Yes, they were found during ironworking that was taking place close to the Chester House estate, which is close to Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. And during the ironworking, the diggers found hundreds of graves, and they also found 3 coffins and also these vessels. So they were packed in this pail, and they caused a great deal of excitement. And they called in the Reverend Baker of Hargrave. Hargrave's just a few miles from the site. So he was a well-known antiquary. He was really, really interested in local history and archaeology. So he was brought in to have a look at the vessels. And he was, of course, very, very excited. And he consulted widely with friends and colleagues in the area. But he also corresponded with lots of people, both regionally and nationally. So he corresponded with Franks, who was curator at the British Museum, but he wrote to lots of archaeological societies and colleagues that had similar interests. He looked to see whether other people or organisations had similar vessels in their collections. So it was a real process of excitement around the kind of investigation, trying to understand the significance of the find.
That process took place over 150 years ago. The discovery was over 150 years ago. The process of archaeology must have been a lot different to what we have today.
Yes, a huge amount of correspondence. Some of that's captured in a paper that Baker wrote describing the process of investigation. He details all of his conversations with these specialists. And what's really interesting is it's not just national experts, but also local people who had an interest. So Mr. Butlin, who ran the local ironworks, carried out metallurgical analysis of the bowls to try and understand the composition of the bronze. They looked at some of the skeletons that had been found, so looking at traces of hair and also fabric that was found through microscopes, again in Mr. Butlin's laboratory. They also corresponded and worked with Samuel Sharp, who lived at Harrowden Hall, who was an expert in coins. He was a numismatist, but also had interest in geology. So there's a real blend of kind of local knowledge and expertise feeding into the investigations and national expertise as well.
Which added to the sum of knowledge. Sarah, you mentioned that graves were found close by to where these items were found. Is it an obvious connection to say that these items were associated with one of the skeletons, with one of the buried, and that therefore the items might have been a prized possession of maybe somebody who was an artisan who used these day to day?
It's entirely possible. I mean, certainly they were found very close to the graves, and actually Baker himself was very, very interested to understand exactly where they were found. So he visited the site, he talked to the diggers who'd found them, was trying to understand the relationship, which is exactly what we're doing today with the excavations at the site here at Irchester, the Chester House estate, very much trying to piece together the story. And what's quite interesting is that they imagined what it might have been like at the graveside. So there's a very interesting narrative trying to give the impression of what it might have been like burying these bowls and the kind of ritual and ceremony around the graveside.
It's a fascinating parallel. I'm just listening to what you're saying and thinking, well, the utilitarian nature of these bowls seems to be mirrored in what we have in the 21st century today. Not much has changed.
Yeah, I mean, they're almost certainly very fine tableware, probably wine strainers and bowls for serving on the table. And obviously they were well used because they'd been repaired. So they were obviously things that people treasured, but absolutely, very similar to the kind of fine tableware we would use today.
So that points to a certain sophistication of the user. Were they indicative of somebody's craft, of somebody's professionalism, their specialism?
Yeah, I mean, they were certainly beautifully crafted, and they're obviously high status items. And I think actually this particular area of Northamptonshire was really thriving under Roman rule. We know the small town of Irchester, which lies within the Chester House estate and which we're excavating today, was actually a thriving small town settlement in the late Roman period. Just up the road was a huge villa at Stanwick that was excavated in the 1980s and 90s. And again, really impressive collections of sculpture. And, it was a really, really important site. So it was a really densely settled Roman landscape in that period, really thriving settlements. There's another settlement at Higham Ferrers. So, yeah, a very, very busy landscape. Really important to kind of think about the whole landscape, not just the kind of site itself. I think it's important to recognise that actually a lot of these things were made locally, and so it's not the Romans bringing things to the Northamptonshire or to Britain, but by the 4th century a lot of things are being produced locally, regionally, in Britain. So actually there are thriving industries, for example, in pottery. So it's become a real kind of hub of industry and production, so very close by near Peterborough, for example. Yeah, so it's a really kind of vibrant, thriving economy.
So these items, this family of items, they are of Northamptonshire in their own manufacture?
We don't know whether they were made in Northamptonshire. We're not 100% sure where they were made, probably in Britain. They may have been imported, but they were found in Northamptonshire. So I think that's really important. So they were certainly used and treasured by people who lived in Northamptonshire.
You are an academic, you are used to the archaeological process. What is your feeling about the people who did the archaeology just over 150 years ago and the information they were able to put together, which forms the basis of our understanding of these items today?
What really strikes me when I'm reading about their investigations and their exploits is just how committed they were, how invested in the archaeology and heritage of their region, and they had a kind of real sense of pride and were really keen to share that with local communities. Often they're seen as simply hunting for treasure. Their excavations are often kind of dismissed in a line or two, but what we can actually see is that they were thinking really carefully about where to excavate. There were excavations that were inspired by the discovery of the bowls and the graves. So in the 1870s, excavations took place within the area of the small town of Irchester. So they were led by the Reverend Baker, who employed a group of able navvies, as they're described, from Wellingborough, to carry out the excavations. He worked with Sir Henry Dryden, who lived at nearby Canons Ashby and was a really skilled artist and draftsman, who recorded the excavations. So there's a plan that survives with all of the annotations describing where they were excavating, what they found. He worked with someone called Scriven, who was a photographer. He was renowned for his photographs of trees, and I found some photographs that he took of trees, unfortunately not the photographs that he took of the excavations. But they really wanted to document the process, and they were really keen to ensure that the finds remained at the site, close to where they were found, so that people could come and see them. So they constructed a shelter at Chester House so that they had a covered area where some of the finds could be on show.
And 150 years later, exactly the same thing is going on, and you are driving that, making sure that that process of discovery, of learning, of understanding continues.
Yes, it's fantastic, actually. There are so many similarities between the excavations and the work we're doing now, and the excavations and the kind of collaborations that you could see in the 19th century excavations. One of the really striking things I came across recently, it was a poem that was written in the 19th century by John Ascham, who was a working class poet inspired by the excavations. He wrote a poem describing people flocking to see the excavations and really kind of captures the excitement. And what's great to see today is that the excavations and the activities are inspiring creativity. So we're working with artists today. There are wellbeing projects that are around archaeology and handling objects and working with local creative artists, but a whole wealth of projects and working with local people, communities, businesses. So there are lots of similarities, and I think it's the power of archaeology to bring people together. That's what's so exciting.
And it is that sense of community all the way from 350 to 400 Roman times, and these 8 bowls contained within a ninth that actually have parallels to the way in which we live our lives in the mid-20s. Sarah, thank you. It's been fascinating.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.